Now, I'm sure that you probably have heard lots of people talk about, particularly women oftentimes, but something that we refer to as intuition. And we end up thinking that this is a fairly reliable form of thinking or reasoning. And essentially, it's effortless. Some key words here would be effortless. I don't have to expend a whole lot of effort to do it. Automatic would be another word that we often use. We make a very snap decision and chalk it up to intuition. And immediate would be another word that tends to come into play when we're talking about intuition. And we make everyday decisions this way all the time. Now, would we call it intuition? I don't know. I've heard a lot of women talk about women's intuition, and they, whether it's the men that they choose or the particular situation that occurs. And 9 times out of 10, the intuition ends up being a hindsight bias rather than an actual anticipation of what is actually occurring. Now, there are some key concepts that are important to understand when we're talking about making decisions and so forth. And essentially, we engage in heuristics, and heuristics is simply a mental shortcut in making a decision. And a lot of times it comes from having practice to being having a lot of practice and having a lot of experience, so we can take some shortcuts because of our experience. Sometimes it's a flash of insight that we might have, but essentially when someone asks me, so how do you do a particular thing? Let's just say somebody asked me, how do you do a good reflection to somebody as a counselor? And part of the heuristic I would describe is I'd be listening for certain words to pay attention to, and then I would construct a response out of that. A little bit like these two bums that are on the street corner, where the problem is I can't tell the difference between a deeply wise, intuitive nudge from the universe or one of my own boneheaded ideas. And a lot of times there's not a lot of difference between those. We just don't make the distinction between those two. Now, a key concept in heuristics, since we've established that as a shortcut, is something we refer to as the availability heuristic. And there are a number of these shortcuts that I want to describe for you here that are key to understanding how we make our decisions. And essentially, the availability heuristic operates when we estimate the likelihood of events based on how mentally available they are. Essentially, it has all to do about how available is the information to me, and because it's available, therefore it must be more reliable, and therefore I make my decision based on just how available it is. And so, for example, I can have a variety of impressions jump into my mind about a person, and because they are readily available to me, I take them as an indication that I'm right, and that's that's the reliability component to it. And so just because it's available, in other words, I have easy access to it, doesn't mean it's correct or accurate. And that's part of this availability heuristic, where we pick up on things, and we pick up on them just simply because they are available to us. They're more accessible to us, and that's typically something that gets us into a fair amount of trouble. Another example of that would be down here in this particular diagram, which is also in your book, but if you look at what the odds are of being in a terrorist attack, an accidental choking, etc., we have very little data available to us about a terrorist attack. And since we don't have very much, it doesn't figure into, well, I should say it another way. Because we don't have very much information on the actual data about it, when it occurs, because it is so emotionally laden, and if we remember back to memory and how much of it is tied into our limbic system, we end up thinking that we are more prone to being caught in one than we actually are. On the other hand, what is so common to us is driving in an automobile, and yet the common data, and yet our odds of getting involved in a car accident are far higher than being caught in a terrorist attack. And this is a good example of this availability heuristic. Essentially, one way to think about this is how available is the information to me, and my understanding of what I don't know is part of the key to being, in a sense, wise, because I understand that I don't know everything, and I may be overestimating something simply because it is just accessible to me to understand it and remember it. Another concept we will get into here in the next slide